Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this ADVI Connect webinar series. My name is Sarah McCauley. I'm the chair of the ADVI Policy and Risk Group Committee, and I'm also the Senior Manager of Public Policy at RAC in Western Australia. For those of you who don't know, ADVI is the peak body for driverless vehicles and provides expert advice to industry and governments with a vision to accelerate the safe and successful introduction of driverless vehicle technology onto Australian and New Zealand roads. ADVI focuses its efforts around four key pillars. These are reach, readiness, regulation, and redesign. The ADVI Connect series is part of the reach pillar, and through this we want to reach out and share what's happening in the industry and connect you with the most up-to-date information and technologies in this sector. So today we're talking about the important topic of universal design of driverless vehicles. While much is reported about the life-changing benefits that driverless vehicle technology will bring to people living with a disability, there are very few projects addressing this application to ensure that the benefits can be realised in the delivery of seamless end-to-end mobility for all. Today's panel of experts will place an accessibility lens over the driverless vehicle sector and raise awareness of what more should be done to accelerate the safe introduction of driverless technology for people living with a disability. We've got a great lineup of panelists for you today. We've got Dr. Jane Brinkoff from the Centre for Universal Design, Greg Gerald from EasyMile, Kieran Hay from ARB, Rowan Rickert from Lifetime Support Authority, and John McPherson from TMR in Queensland. So just to give you a bit of an overview of how the session will run today, in terms of the format, each of the panelists are going to have a couple of minutes to tell you a bit about themselves, their organisations and the work they're doing in this area, as well as maybe share a couple of thought starters. We'll then have a bit of a discussion. I'll kick us off with a few questions, but we really do want some audience engagement, so please do feel free to submit questions, and you can do that through the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll fill those. And then once we've had the discussion, I'm going to invite each of the panelists just to do a bit of a closing statement, and that's really to share their thoughts around what they see as the most significant opportunity or action that could be taken in the short term to ensure we're planning for a truly inclusive and automated future. So we hope you enjoy the webinar today, and as I said, please do submit your questions for the panel. I'm now going to pass you over to Dr. Jane Brinkoff. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today, and that is the Darug people of Western Sydney. Okay, so my background goes back many years, probably far too many for me to want to remember, in the community sector, and for some reason or other it took me into the area of ageing and disability and general inclusion over the years. And in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been working in the space of universal design, which is the design of all things. It covers everything: built environment, products, ICT, the way that we do teaching and learning, our holidays, the services that we have, and I like to now see it applied to policies, universally designed policies. We have a website which is a clearinghouse of information that you know, anyone can have a look at and do and search. We're connected globally because universal design is actually a movement, and it's been going for 30, 40 years now. And we run a newsletter, and I do a lot on social media. So that's just that's it for me. So if we just go to the little slide I've got, just the one slide. There we go. So as I said, a universal design is about the inclusion of everyone. It's not a special design. Sometimes I find it easier to explain it by what it is not. So it's not disability design. It's not compliance with accessibility. It's not just for I mean, a lot of people, when you talk about accessibility, immediately the picture that comes into their head is a person in a wheelchair. So it's much broader than that. There are probably more people with an invisible disability than there are with a visible one. So universal design is integral to the design. It's not added on later. In buildings, you see it's still happening. You know, you get the grand design and then someone says, and that's how you end up with the tacked-on ramp instead of it being included within the actual design from the beginning. So that's the important thing. It begins at the concept stage. So I like to say that disability and ageing advocates need to be at the table, not on the menu. That is, they need to be there, not talked about as if they're a different group of people from the people all around the table. And of course, these vehicles are not about drivers anymore. So although it's called driverless, it's actually more about passengers. And when it comes to, you know, maybe some policy drivers, we are, all of us, bound by the National Disability Strategy, which is our way of interpreting the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And it's also, universal design is in the UN Convention, and it's also in the UN Convention sustainability goals that is also targeting inclusion now. And specifically, they're using the word disability as well within that convention. So that's all from me in just a brief introduction for now. So I look forward to some questions later on.
Great, thanks, Jane.
Hi guys, my name is Greg Giraud. I'm the Managing Director for ADVI in Australia and New Zealand. We're based out of Adelaide in this region, and we've been involved in a number of trial and projects with state and local government across Australia. My background is in car sharing. I was previously General Manager of Hertz car share operations in Australia. Interestingly, regarding today's topic, I don't think that car sharing is a good example of a new mobility that is all-inclusive because we were using traditional cars to service our customers and members. So I think it's interesting to see that, you know, with driverless vehicle, I guess we've got the chance to start fresh and to not reiterate the mistake and challenges of the past. Can you go to the next slide, Pharah, please? Just tell you a few words about ADVI and how we tie in today's discussion regarding universal design. So as ADVI, basically we're in the business of shared mobility. Our flagship product is the autonomous shuttle that you can see on the screen, which integrate with existing public transport to bridge the first mile, last mile gap, but also provide new mobility solution in different environments. This is the most deployed autonomous shuttle globally. We've deployed in more than 300 projects across 30 countries. In terms of our strategy, and you know, it's quite important and essential with regard to today's debate and the design of vehicles. We're not a vehicle manufacturer. We're a tech company, and we partner with automotive manufacturers to develop autonomous vehicles. I'll tell you how it works. So the automotive manufacturer would provide us with the platform, the vehicle, if you like, and as ADVI, we would provide the sensor set, the software and algorithm that can make the platform autonomous. A good example of this strategy and the kind of platform we're working on, you can see on the top right corner, that's a shuttle that's in the US, and that's a new partnership that was just formed last month with Phoenix Motor Cars. And the automotive manufacturer will provide this 23 people shuttle, and as ADVI, we will make it autonomous. The benefits of this strategy for us from, I guess, regulation and access to transport regulation perspective is that we start from platforms that are already compliant for the roads in the countries in which we operate. And finally, I just want to talk a bit about the promises of driverless vehicle and the fact that we want to provide mobility solutions that are equitable. To me, this is arguably one of the biggest opportunities for autonomous vehicle, and it's really core to the value proposition of AVs. There is a huge unsatisfied need for many demographics when it comes to transport, especially the elderly communities, rural communities, and also for people with disabilities. And just to give you a couple of stats, in Australia, we have almost 1 in 5 people that's living with a disability. That's 4.5 million people. And this stat is quite consistent with other developed countries like the US, for example, where we also have about 20% of people that live with a disability. So the potential for autonomous vehicle to deliver increased mobility for these groups is simply immense. And because we are at the very beginning of the driverless revolution, we have a chance to start fresh and to look at solutions that are just designed to include everyone. And I think it's really critical because mobility is opportunity, and mobility is freedom. And if we ostracize some entire groups of our communities and limit transportation option and access to this transportation, this will result in reduced economic opportunities and isolation that will exacerbate medical condition and lead to other medical conditions, potentially depression, and eventually a diminished quality of life. So I think that's one again of the big benefits that we see with driverless vehicle. Now I just want to play a very short video which is based on a project in an aged care and retirement village in Canberra that we ran last year. And you'll see it's a good example of the application of there's no sound, so I'll do the live commentaries. So this is, that's the aged care facility in Canberra. I guess the use case for us was really to be able to bring a new mobility solution to the residents of this aged care village. We had some residents in this village that were so mobility impaired that they couldn't get out of their house anymore. And they couldn't actually even get to the cafeteria, which is just a few hundred meters down the road. And again, I think what was really striking for this project is that the benefit in terms of giving people their mobility back and social inclusion and allowing these people to be able to get back from their dwellings again and interact with the rest of the village, these benefits were just immense. As you can see just a second ago, our vehicle borrow a lot of access feature from the world of public transport. You've seen that automated ramp that was deployed for this specific project. We had to deploy that ramp at almost every stop because we had people that were so severely impaired that they couldn't get on the shuttle without help from the ramp and from the safety attendant that was on board the vehicle as well. And that's the kind of project where I feel that we need more research. We need more such projects to be able to understand more how this demographic interact for the technology and where the benefits are really, and how it can address challenges that traditional public transport or traditional vehicle cannot address. That's the same thing with rural communities, for example, where there's a very big gap in terms of the public transport network. You can see the buttons that's for wheelchair and access for people that are mobility impaired. So that project ran in May last year. It was just a few weeks, but again, I think it really demonstrated that there is real value to have this kind of solution in aged care and retirement village to service these specific demographics. That's the end of the video. Thanks very much.
Hi, my name's Kieran Hay. I'm a senior professional engineer at the Australian Road Research Board. My main focus is, I guess, more towards transport safety. That's what I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, I guess. So my knowledge of accessibility, I guess, was quite limited in the last couple of years until I started working on a National Asset Centre of Excellence project. So that's I guess a partnership with ARB and also the Department of Transport and Main Roads Queensland. And I might actually get Caesar just to skip to the next slide, and it'll make a little bit more sense here. So as I was saying, so in the last couple of years, through the NACO partnership with the Department of Transport and Main Roads, we started investigating and reviewing the design and development practices that relate to accessibility for people with a disability. And that's, I guess, where a lot of my knowledge comes from in this kind of space. Accessibility for vulnerable users is an issue that is not given as much attention as it needs. And I think, like some other people said, typically it is kind of an afterthought after design is already at the end stages. Through this project, there was, I guess, 3 main tasks, and the review of existing policies and guidance was one of them. And this is more around the actual transport sector, not specifically automated vehicles or passenger vehicles. So this is along transport and main roads, transport network itself. So it included public transport to some degree, as well as their road network in general. And then I guess one of the main or most interesting things coming out of this was looking at performance-based concepts that aim to include target users in the design process. So this is getting specific user groups such as people with disability involved in those design processes from the start to ensure that they're part of that process, and that the end design actually includes facilities for them to use to make that design accessible. The third part was mainly focused around the NDIS, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme in Australia, and how that's helping user capabilities with assistance aids or mobility aids. And then, looking at some topography stuff, which, that kind of relates back to AVs a little bit. So I guess, I'm a little bit of an outlier in this conversation, where my main focus isn't specifically automated vehicles and it's not specifically accessibility, but I do have, a reasonable amount of knowledge in that space at this point. That's everything from me. I think over to Rowan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Rowan Weckett. I'm from the Lifetime Support Authority in South Australia, and I work in the corporate governance team. I'm the senior scheme legal advisor. Just on the next slide, thanks. The Lifetime Support Authority, we administer the Lifetime Support Scheme, and the scheme started in July of 2014. We have about 290 participants, and they are people that have been injured in motor vehicle accidents in South Australia since 2014 across the following injury types: so spinal cord injury, brain injury, amputations, burns, and permanent blindness. We have approximately 68% of our participants that have a brain injury. That's our biggest cohort. And we have about 16% spinal cord injury, 15% amputations, and 1% burns, and no permanent blindness participants at the moment. And many of our participants have multiple injury types, as well as orthopedic and other injuries that we have to also manage and coordinate services for. The Lifetime Support Scheme is growing every year, unfortunately, as people keep getting injured. Approximately 50 new participants enter the scheme is forecast each year. And we're funded by a Lifetime Support Scheme levy on motor vehicle registrations for South Australian vehicles. And we raise approximately $160 million a year, and that covers the lifetime costs for the cohort of people that are injured in that year. We spent approximately $21.7 million last year on our treatment care and support costs. And so we coordinate and fund services for all of our participants across medical treatment, rehabilitation, attendant care and support services, equipment, prostheses, education and vocational training, transport, and obviously home and vehicle mods, which is why I guess we're involved with ADVI, because it's important for us to be sort of at the forefront of the technology change, and we can help shape it to help our participants in our scheme. The majority of our spend is on attendant care and support, approximately nearly $10 million last year. But we also obviously fund equipment, participant transport, and home and vehicle mods, which we spent about $600,000 or $700,000 last year on that. We have a very engaged participant cohort. So we have a participant reference group who report directly to our board with regular meetings. So that's a group with participants and family members who review our policies and provide a direct voice of the participant group to our management. And we also hold regular participant forums. One other thing to note is we have currently in-house service planning. So we have the team of service planners within our structure. It's not a separate company or a separate claims manager. So we have direct relationships with the participants and the family members. So we have a very strong relationship model and participant-centered practice. So we think we know our participants really well, and that's why we are interested to help them with technology. We invest in technology early in rehabilitation to try and reduce their attendant care needs later on in life and maintain their independence as long as possible. Thanks.
Hello, John McPherson. Yep, John McPherson. I'd like to acknowledge the terrible people on whose land I am. And I work for the Department of Transport and Main Roads in Queensland, and we're very interested in autonomous vehicles. How to ensure they provide an equitable level of passenger support to that of staffed vehicles, how the designs might meet the disability standards for accessible public transport and satisfy the Disabilities Discrimination Act. We're watching the trials that are ongoing. There's been one on a little island out in Moreton Bay recently. And the last two, regulation to remake road rules and understanding requirements for roads. I'll let those two go because mine's greater than what I possess. Will need to think those through. But the accessible transport network in which I'm based is a very powerful interest in how we're going to make sure that these AVs actually work for all passengers. And it's identifying where the gaps are before we actually find the problem. So if we come up with a great design and then find it doesn't work particularly well, it's because we haven't gone through the process that other speakers have mentioned, and that's co-design. So co-designing, identifying the problems first up. How can we make sure that we've actually incorporated all of these issues into the design of the vehicle, or the software, the artificial intelligence that makes this vehicle work? All of the various things that need to go together to make sure it will function. And we also have a regulatory environment in which you work, and the disability standards for accessible public transport, though they are dated, are being modernised currently. And I have no doubt at all, but by the time we're finished, autonomous vehicles and things pertaining to autonomous vehicles will be included in them. What will it look like? Don't know yet. Watch this space. The recent trials, actually, we've seen a nice video previous to me speaking, and that illustrated, quite frankly, how useful these things can be on first and last mile in particular. Just say someone lives 200 meters from a bus stop. They can't get there because of the topography. Their mobility isn't fantastic. How would they get to the bus stop? Book a taxi? Probably a bit expensive if you're only wanting to go on the bus. So is there a possibility that an AV could actually pick someone up and drop them at the bus stop? Every possibility in the world. but they've got to be able to book that AV. They've got to be able to hail it if it's simply doing a route run and it's a hail and ride. So how would we make all of these things work? Well, first up, identify the problem. Then make sure that we've got a design that works properly. There's another slide down below that, if we could go to that. There we go. Now, in the past, we've had to address many challenges with public transport, and this is quite apart from AVs. But we inherited in the mid-90s, a very forbidding environment. The infrastructure, more often than not, was not particularly accessible. The vehicles were not designed to accommodate people with mobility or sensory impairments. So in all of that time, we've had to go through an evolution, which often involved intervention. We had high floor buses, for example, in the early 90s. How to move to low floor buses? Well, they were more expensive than the high floor buses. So it took subsidy to actually make it accessible, the accessible bus, an attractive purchase. Quite apart from the fact that there was legislation, it cost more. So, but with government subsidy, it actually became cheaper to buy the low floor. So suddenly it was a no-brainer. Before the disability standards came in 2002, in about 1995, people started changing over so that there was a head start, if you would. So when the standards came in, industry was well ahead of it because suddenly it was better to buy a low floor bus than a high floor bus. So that was a very strategic intervention by various jurisdictions, not all, but some. And I saw that in Brisbane, where the Brisbane City Council actually had something like 45 to 50% of its buses accessible by the time the standards require that they be starting to convert to accessibility. So if we get ahead of the game, we can actually solve problems that are arising before they even arise. And that helped us with coming up to the requirements for the buses to turn over in a particular time frame. So once again, speaking about Brisbane City Council, they were 100% compliant with low floor buses by about 2014 from memory, and the target date was 2022. So we can get ahead of the game in these things. If we think it through ahead of time, plan and do what we need to do, it works quite well, and it's painless, hopefully. With hailing, boarding and alighting from vehicles, the challenge for someone who has a vision impairment, how do you hail a bus that you can't see? There are technical ways we can do it using smartphones. We can use all sorts of things. But what if people aren't particularly proficient with smartphones? What sort of artificial intelligence can we come up with that will actually allow people to be identified as wanting the bus while they can't actually see the bus coming? So whilst people who are very good with the smartphone will probably press a few buttons with their thumb and the bus will just think, aha, I have a passenger at the next stop. It may well be that we need to think about how will the AI identify that passenger if the passenger doesn't have the skill to use the device that we would require them to use. Now, this is a problem to be solved. It's not insoluble. We'll do it. We will. We mightn't have the answer just yet, or we may, that I'm not aware of it, but we will come up with that answer. Currently, it's not so hard. A driver sees someone with a guide dog or a white cane at the stop and they think, well, they're not going to see me. And the drivers have been told, pull over and ask, do you want my bus? Yes, I do. Or no, I'm after the next one. No problem. And on they go. So how do we get the AI to be as considerate as that driver and trained as that driver? So that's a challenge there. Will it happen? Yes, it will. The other problems that we will face in a taxi. Currently, if you're in a maxi taxi and you're using a wheelchair, you need to be restrained. If we have an autonomous maxi taxi pull up, who's going to strap the wheelchair into position and put the seatbelt on the occupant? Do we have a solution? We will have to, and one way or the other, we're going to have to think our way through that one problem. There is a solution to a problem. We'll find it, but there's a problem. So there's a challenge there on that one. Safety also includes not missing your stop. I have a friend who's vision impaired, and he not infrequently ends up at the bus depot because he didn't get any announcement of his stop. Now, some buses announce what the next stop will be, most do not. So if we have an autonomous vehicle, it will need to identify to people your stop is coming up. There's different ways we can do that. Once again, it could be through the smartphone, or it could be an onboard announcement. One way or the other, that person has to be able to communicate where I want to get off in some way so that the vehicle can tell them, hey, we're there. Problem. But yeah, we'll find a solution. Otherwise, people will end up at the bus depot or keep doing circles, not knowing when to get off. So these various problems that confront us all have solutions, but the important thing is that we identify the problem and we co-design the solution, because not everyone knows everything. I'm surprised at just how much I don't know at times, but equally surprised at just how well I can learn when people point out the problems and I start thinking about the solutions. So without carrying on too much further, I'll end it there, but there's a lot of talking to be done in this space, because we do have some quite difficult challenges to address, but I'm quite certain that we can come up with solutions to all of them. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, everyone. And thanks very much, John. You sort of nicely touched on there some of the sort of current gaps with the transport system and design for people living with a disability, and I suppose how the advent of AVs could potentially cause some obstacles, new obstacles for people with a disability. And if we don't take action now and make sure that we are co-designing and universally designing. I'm keen to throw that question to anyone else who wants to add to it, but also interested to sort of hear your thoughts on some of the main barriers to the development of universally designed or co-designed vehicles. You know, it seems we know it's the right thing to do, but how do we sort of overcome some of the current barriers to doing it? And make sure that manufacturers and others are actually doing this as part of their design process at the early stages. Sure, who wants to take? Jane?
In my experience, when it comes to the word disability, that actually scares a lot of people. So I think one of the first steps is actually to so perception is one of the barriers, I think, and the idea that this is
oh, sorry. Jane, I think we're losing you a little bit. I'm sorry, Jane, I think you've got a bad connection. Oh, sorry. Does somebody else maybe want to take that question?
Much more time to do, that obviously is going to have a cost impact.
Jane, we've lost your audio.
Are you hearing me now or not?
It's very intermittent.
Yeah, okay. So.
Would somebody else like to chip in on that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in for the time being. I think that John really articulated the challenges extremely well, and what we need to do, which is really starting for the problems. Currently, I think that, you know, despite the legislation around accessibility, such as the disability standard for accessible PT in Australia, not 100% of the public transport is accessible, far from it. And I think we're playing catch up and retrofitting, and it's a lot harder and a lot more costly than starting from scratch with the right solution. Something that John mentioned as well, which is extremely relevant to what we're trying to do at EasyMile, is the lack of first and last mile solutions to get to the transport hub for these people. So, you know, it's nice to have, you know, all this mass transport systems, train stations, the buses and so on, but if you cannot access them, it's just not efficient. So I think, you know, the idea is that I guess we want to avoid creating new obstacles as well. again, that's the chance that we have as we're at the very beginning of this journey with driverless vehicles to design them so that they are as inclusive as possible. And some obstacles sometimes can come from places that you wouldn't expect. For example, if you look at regulation and very restrictive policies, it was in California, I think in 2015, where they had proposed a draft regulation that would require passengers in autonomous vehicles to have a full driver license at all times. And now they've backed away from this regulation, thankfully, because some disability groups stepped in, but it was completely, not taking into account the fact that a significant proportion of individuals with a disability simply cannot have a valid driver license. So I think we have to be mindful of not creating new challenges, especially on the parts that we can control, like new policies.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And in terms of how we should ensure this sort of, I suppose, best practice design, what are some of the best practices or the policy levers that can be pulled to make sure that we do see the design of these vehicles actually being inclusive and providing mobility for all? So as Jane sort of talked about in her points, we're not talking about special designs, we're talking about vehicles that are appropriate for all. And just, I suppose, picking up on that as well, one of the comments or questions that we got from someone in the audience is just around, we're having a lot of discussion here about public transport, but it would also be good to just, I suppose, put a bit of a lens on it from a family's perspective. So, so sort of thinking about the typical family car as well. I can't hear Jane.
Can I try again?
Oh, yeah.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yes, yes, there's nodding. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, actually, that was a topic that I wanted to bring up, which was that when we start talking about disability statistics, we start thinking about the individual. But individuals don't live a life alone. They live in groups and families. And the tourism industry has picked this up, that for every one person that you exclude with a disability or who is aging, you exclude a whole lot of other people. So it isn't just about, saying, well, 1 in 5, well, that's okay, I'll just work with the other 4. Is that it is all about people being able to do things as a group. And when we add in the chronic illness, the long-term illness such as arthritis, back problems and so on, they are counted separately in the ABS statistics. And when you add those into the household, when we're thinking about households, you're starting to look at around 50% of households having a person with disability or chronic illness. And I'm being, fairly conservative here. So it's really about understanding that bodies come in all shapes and forms, they perform in all sorts of different ways, they have different ways of being, and that's what being human is about. It isn't about the Botoxed beauty. It is about, everybody being who they are. And once we get to realise that different is normal, then I think we will be getting somewhere.
That's great. Great point. Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that?
I couldn't agree more with Jane. Most people don't travel alone unless they're commuting to work, whatever. If people want to go out for any social exercise, the likelihood is that they'll go with their friends or their family, or someone will travel with them for whatever purpose. It might be a carer, it might be someone funded by the NDIS to go with them, to offer support and help them enjoy that. So yeah, it's a nonsense to think that people with disabilities should be seen as statistics. They're part of society. We all live in this world together, one way or the other. So what works for one needs to work for all. So for argument's sake, if I can't get on a particular form of transport, the people I'm traveling with won't get onto it either. Mm. So we're all locked out, and that's the reality that we travel in packs and herds. I'm not trying to turn us into donkeys or anything like that, but we are social creatures, and therefore the vehicles that we use, whether private cars, whatever, or public transport needs to reflect the fact that we actually do move in social groups. And yes, we take individual journeys, absolutely, and they must be accounted for. But we also travel together in groups for various purposes.
And does anyone want to comment on, I suppose, some of the policy levers or other sort of practices that we can explore to help ensure that designers, manufacturers, and procurers do actually adopt this sort of whole of journey mindset, so that we are looking at this, you know, as a complete journey and addressing some of those issues that John touched on earlier, you know, with wait times and getting access to the transport services in the first place, if you're looking at them as automated public transport. But yeah, just thinking about, you know, whether it is those policy levers, or if you want to touch on something around trials and demonstrations and where we should sort of be focusing some of these efforts in the short term.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, Pharah. I think that we're at a stage where the development of the technology is intimately linked with regulations and with deployment as well. And I think there's a real need for a collaborative effort between the government, the industry, and disability groups to start creating, there's an urgent need actually to start creating that agenda and a platform for discussion around these issues. And for the government, the three level of government, to take the lead through, you know, I guess commissioning of research, pilot and trial as well, such as the like that, you know, we've seen in some Edgecote village in Australia. I think it's really critical also to understand how people interact with technology, to engage with the industry, understand where the gaps are, and simply, you know, build solutions that will be fitted for everyone.
Yeah, just following up from that, I know in a lot of cases there isn't really any specific best practice around you know, guidelines for the development of automated vehicles specifically, but then in also a lot of other industries, there's not a lot of best practices. It's typically just a compliance design approach where it's using the minimum set value to design for something. In regards to automated vehicles and accessibility, it could be that the development of a best practice for that may be one of the better steps to start with. I know there's accessibility guidelines, I think it's the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, which has a number of different levels that specifically says how to make something accessible to all users. It could be that something like that is developed before we go into the process of trying to make all these automated vehicles, to ensure that when we do make them, they are as accessible as possible, or at least have some sort of different levels identifying the level of accessibility, so that when people are trying to buy these vehicles, they know what level of accessibility to expect. And then following on from that, I guess the government can play quite a large role in that as well. You know, in the past, especially like John said with the buses, they've put in subsidies and put in regulation to say that, you know, these public transport, you know, vehicles should be to a level of accessibility for everyone. And it may be worth saying that, you know, vehicles that are imported should have this level of accessibility in the future. And then, you know, set out a timeline and an agenda to make that happen, and again provide subsidies if needed to ensure that those accessibility requirements are met.
That's a really great point.
I think Jane may have wanted to say something as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think when it comes to best practice, I start to look at best practice policy, and you know, is the policy that you're working with universally designed itself? And I think some of the best practice that I've seen in terms of co-design or including people with disability at the table, one was the development, the Everyone Can Play guidelines, which is about inclusive play spaces. And the iterative process that took place there was one of the best processes. But it started with someone at the beginning just sitting down before we even thought about how we would design a guideline, thinking about how can we do it universally, how can we do it for everyone, because play spaces are for people of all ages. The other example is the City of Sydney not access and inclusion, but inclusion panel, where they have a group of people with a whole range of different disabilities. But the thing that they did was they did give them a sitting fee. That's one of the other barriers for people coming to help with co-design, is because you have a disability, somehow you're assumed to want to do it for free. Yet they have all this information and you want to take that for free. So I think a sitting fee is really important. And the other things that need to be done in terms of best practice is, if you're going to have a deaf person, then either have a captioner or an interpreter. If you're going to have some people there who are blind, make sure that you have the systems that work for them and can get them there. And if you're going to have wheelchair users, for example, making sure the venue is accessible, making sure you don't do it at 9 o'clock in the morning, because many wheelchair users are still getting themselves ready. It takes them 2 to 3 hours, some people, to get ready in the morning. So timing, place, support services to get people there, really try and do it in a genuine way.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I've got a question here from the audience regarding AV driving simulation, and whether that might be a useful sort of creating that virtual environment to help with the testing and trialing of the technology. I'm not sure whether, Rowan, you might want to add some insights from what you know from your membership, and whether that sort of thing or any other particular use cases or ways of engaging them in the process might be well received.
Yeah, I think for us, we focus on person-centered practice. So it's kind of like checking in with our cohort about their communication preference, so that it is inclusive. So if if you're looking for contacts or trying to get some responses out of our participants, we need to know how they like to be communicated with, whether it's through their family member, through email, text message, phone, post, whatever it is. But we also spend a lot of time, obviously, training and developing people to maintain their independence. So with that technology, we will get an OT assessment to help a participant use their new technology that they need from their disability, and that helps them communicate and staying connected with their social networks and with us as well. So we try and spend a lot of time and effort in the early stages of someone's injury or disability to promote that independence, so that they can contribute to society and to their family and community as much as possible. And then obviously with us, from our participant feedback cycle, we always encourage input from our cohort to our decision making, and we're always open to that. And we pride ourselves, I think, on reaching out and being a very accessible workplace, and being very responsive to the needs of our participants as well.
Yeah, great. And maybe someone else might want to touch on that as well, but it also had a related question around opportunities for government to collaborate with vehicle manufacturers to build a prototype vehicle to aid testing of the technologies as well. So I'm not sure if anyone wants to.
I would just add to that one, Sarah. Yeah, if anybody wanted to raise that with us, because we have obviously a cohort of people that are very interested in this technology, we would be happy to help to raise that with our participants and see if anyone's interested in giving up their time. Obviously, as Jane said, like a sitting fee is kind of relevant. We do that for our participant reference group, and we obviously reimburse people for their travel, or organise it and pay for it as well. But we would be happy to link any of the ADVI stakeholders up to users of this technology or future users, because I know we'd have some participants that are very interested in helping in any way they could. They already do that with us, and they'll do that with ADVI as well.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And Greg, I know you've done some accessibility audits for your vehicles as well previously.
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually conducted by the Transport and Main Roads Accessibility Reference Group. I'm not sure if you were part of that review, John. You might have been involved. And like I said earlier, most of our accessibility features at the moment come from the world of public transport. But the accessibility reference group pointed out that our vehicle is not compliant with the standard Disability Act for public transport currently, and that some of these features needed to be improved. So as you've seen, we've got the access ramp, the capability of the vehicle to kneel as well to facilitate hop on, hop off. But at times, the ramp is too steep for people that are really severely impaired from a mobility perspective to get on the bus. As John or Jane pointed out earlier as well, at the moment, if someone with a wheelchair or a mobility aid come on board, we rely on the safety operator to harness the wheelchair. And I think in terms of the current state for us, we achieved the best practices by still relying on that human touch and the fact that we have a safety operator on board our vehicle. And that's when they can bridge the gap. If people are, hearing or vision impaired, for example, they can talk to them at the bus stop and see whether they need help. They can hop on the bus. We do have a number of buttons, tactile buttons in Braille on the vehicle, and the ergonomy of it is in line with best practices for accessibility. Other things that were cited is that you probably need more space for guide dogs, potentially space under the seat so that the guide dog could just lie there during the trip. So there's all these things that were pointed out to us and that we need to work on. I think one of the barriers from the AV industry perspective is that there is a very diverse set of requirements and needs when it comes to transportation for people with a disability, and they might vary greatly depending on what this disability is. And taking into account all these requirements is not impossible, not at all, but it's a very big task. And I think that there is a conflict of priorities currently because, as you well know, Pharah, as the AV industry, the holy grail is to reach that level 5 automation and remove that safety operator. And at the moment, we have a laser focus on developing purely the driverless technology. A lot of the feature that would come with universal design, we would have to partner with other technology provider. And John touched to that as well in terms of AI, potentially have vehicles that respond to vocal commands so that people can direct the vehicle, and vehicles that can really react to the passengers that are on board and their specific needs. For example, for someone with no disability to travel on one of our shuttle, they can hop on and hop off anywhere. For someone who's on a wheelchair, if our vehicle drop them at a regular stop, it might just not be adapted to that person. So, there's a lot of, I think we really need to scope out this problem appropriately and start creating an ecosystem of partners to work on that universal design.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we're running short on time now, so we'll have one more quick question from the audience, and then I will give you all a chance to just 1 minute quick fire on your closing remarks. The question I've got here is around, has any thought or work sort of taken place around the development of an accessibility rating for AVs? And if not, is that a good opportunity? Good question, because everyone's stumped.
It doesn't hurt to have an accessibility rating, but it would depend upon the use for which it was intended. So if for example, it was stars, 1 star meant, okay, most people can get on, but not the person who's unable to hail, or the person unable to use the ramp if there's no curb there to take the steepness of the ramp. That would not be necessarily helpful because it's only telling you what the vehicle can't do. So if we started at a good base point and the vehicle was accessible, and then we went on to magnificently accessible, that would be very good. But if it starts at accessible and goes down, that we're really only saying what it can't do, and I don't see that as being useful at all.
So you're really looking at an A++ kind of rating system?
Yes, love it or hate it, there will probably be a prescriptive minimum for anything in the way of public transport and accessibility. That will be able to be overcome by direct assistance. Greg touched on that. Currently, there's people on the AVs, and they're doing exactly what the artificial intelligence will need to do when we move to completely autonomous vehicles. So if the rating was vehicle's great, but you'll need a hand, and we've got someone there, that's a good rating. So it's not an artificial intelligence, it's a human intelligence. But then we might go up the scale and from there. And that would be very useful for people to know. Will I interact with a human or a machine or a software intelligence? So lots of things beyond that minimum prescription of, yes, you must be able to use this service. But ratings that give an enhancement would be far superior to setting ratings that say, well, sorry, we're coming down the scale from accessible.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you very much. So yeah, so if you can kind of keep it definitely under a minute, but as short as possible. So just really one quick statement, a closing remark, or something you want the audience to take away in terms of what you see as the most significant opportunity or key action that can be taken in the short term to ensure that we're planning for a truly inclusive automated future. So go to you first, Jane.
I think the point that I want to make is that while we've discussed people with disability, universal design is about everybody, and almost every time that there is an improvement for people with disability, our smartphones, a really good example, is they become really useful for everyone else. Captions are great for everyone because you can turn the sound off. So there are good examples out there to say that designing for everyone is really important. And the people that we haven't even discussed are the people with strollers or anyone with wheeled devices. So my advice is have a look at something called the 8 Goals of Universal Design, and that can help you get started. And you can find that on our website, or you just Google 8 Goals of Universal Design and you've got your starter.
Great, thanks, Jane. Greg?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think, like I said earlier, to me, the earlier the community makes its priorities known, the easier it will be to influence the development of AV technology. I think the kind of debate and discussion we're having today is very healthy and very important because there is that urgent need to create that common agenda at the intersection between AV and disability policy and other groups that need accessibility to public transport. And to me, I think that the government has really a central role in taking the lead here, and also creating an environment where the industry and companies will want to invest in these technologies that are really going to become critical in the next 10 to 15 years, either by facilitating pilot project or having grant program to develop the missing pieces of the technology to address these specific issues.
Great, thank you. Rowan?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, just really quickly, I think from the LSA's perspective, we're just really keen to partner with anyone that's wanting access to our participants or anywhere we can influence the design of these vehicles. We're a lifetime scheme, so we're going to be around for a long time and have any of our child participants will be looking after them until like the 80 years. So it's a long journey, and we're here to help. And if anyone wants to partner with us or reach out to try and work on any projects together, we're happy to help in any way. And you can contact me or look on our website and find us and get a hold of that if you wanted to develop anything further.
Great, thank you. John?
First and foremost, co-design, which is to say, pull all the stakeholders into one place, talk the problem through, and then set about the solutions. Others have touched on how that might be. I won't take more of my time because I've spoken a little bit too much today. So getting together, working it out, and operating in a community environment, because people with disabilities are not islands complete unto themselves. They're part of a society. So it works for everybody. That's what we need. Coming back to Jane's point, universal. I've said enough. People are saying it for me, so I'll draw the line there.
Great, thanks, John. And last but not least, Karen.
Yeah, I think my main thing is just making sure that we don't fall back on our typical approach of just designing for compliance. There needs to be some sort of guide in place that really goes above and beyond to ensure that accessibility is the key factor, not just being able to cram a couple of people into a car, basically. It needs to be a dignified approach so that anyone, not just people with disability, can access these vehicles with ease and in comfort, basically. And again, co-design, basically. Ensure that you're facilitating consultation with the people that you need to be consulting.
Great, well, thanks very much. And thanks to the audience for joining us today for this ADVI Connect webinar series. We hope you've enjoyed it. And thanks very much to each of the panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us. We hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.